Hello everybody and welcome back to another Brave Wise video. Today we'll be going through the Pearson Edexcel IGCSE Paper 1B for Biology. Now this paper is for May 2023, and although it says double award right here, this paper is to be done by both double and triple award students. So it's really important you know the strategy to answer these questions, as you can develop skills and strategies that you can use for any paper no matter how difficult the question is. That's why today I'm going to go through each and every question and explain you my strategy and my thought process to answer each question, and hopefully you will find it much easier to do these paper ones. Now remember, these are 110 marks, so it's really important you get this down regardless of if you're double or triple student. You really need to ace this paper. So I'm going to show you how to do it today with this May 2023 paper. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, question 1A. All living organisms share characteristics. State two characteristics that all living organisms share. Now you see characteristics here and we see living organisms, and our mind should instantly jump to that mnemonic that we all know, which is Mrs. H. Grant. Now if you haven't heard of this, it's basically an easy way of memorizing the characteristics that all living organisms share. We're just looking at each of these letters here, and there's a word that starts with each of these letters here that is a characteristic, and I'll just show you what I mean by going through each and every one of them. So let's say for M. For M, the characteristic we have is movement. Then R, we have respiration. S, sensitivity. H, homeostasis. G, growth. The second R is reproduction. This E is for excretion, and the N is for nutrition. Now, I'm sure you know what most of them mean, but if you're not sure about homeostasis, it might be a bit unfamiliar to you. Homeostasis is basically the maintaining or control of your internal conditions, and that is a characteristic that all living organisms share. Now, we only need to mention two here, so let's just keep it simple. All living organisms respire. That's the characteristic we can say they share, and they all grow. Growth. That's the characteristics. They have respiration and they all grow. So it's pretty easy to answer this. You can use any of them. You can say that they require nutrition, that they excrete their waste, that they respond to their surroundings, which shows their sensitivity. They control their internal conditions for homeostasis. They reproduce. Whatever you want, you can put there, and it's a very free, easy 2 marks. Okay. II. Some organisms are pathogens. Which of these organisms can cause a bacterial disease in humans? Chlorella, Lactobacillus, Mucor, and Pneumococcus. Now, this should be a pretty easy one. It's just based on your understanding of the syllabus, the theory. We know that it's not A because Chlorella does not cause bacterial disease in humans. Okay. Lactobacillus also does not cause bacterial disease in humans. Mucor also does not cause bacterial disease in humans, which leaves us with pneumococcus, which is the one we should pretty easily know causes a bacterial disease in humans. Okay, B. Viruses and pathogens, but viruses are pathogens but not living organisms. Describe the effect of a named virus that infects plants. Okay, now I assume that you all are familiar with the same virus that infects plants, and it should have just jumped into your head now, but if you've learned a separate virus, then feel free to answer the question based on that. The one I'm going to go with right now is TMV. Now, TMV you should know is tobacco mosaic virus. It's one that most of you will have learned, and it wants us to name it for 1 mark. So we've got a mark already. That's 1 out of 2. And now we want to get 2 out of 2. So what's it asking us? It wants to describe the effect that it has on plants. So if you are familiar with TMV, you should know that the effect that it has on plants is that it leads to discolored leaves. Right? It leads to discolored leaves, and it causes problems with photosynthesis because of a lack of chlorophyll. So you can mention it however way you want. I'm going to just say discolored leaves because that's already enough. But essentially the consequence of the discolored leaves is that there's a lack of chlorophyll in these leaves, which means that less photosynthesis can occur, which causes many problems with the plant as they're not able to synthesize enough glucose. And yeah, that's a pretty easy question as long as you remember the virus that infects plants, which for most of you should be TMV. Okay, first page done. Let's go right to the second. Give 3 differences between the structure of viruses and bacteria. Now this should be pretty easy. There's many differences. And a lot of them are related to the fact that a virus is not a living organism while a bacteria is. So what can we say here? Well, one thing that we should know that's really specific for a virus is that it has a protein code. When you see structure of a virus, you always see this protein code for virus. And remember, you always want to mention the converse as well. Never leave it up to chance, because you always have the risk of not getting the mark. Even if you're relatively sure that you're going to get the mark, always write the converse. And what I mean by that is if I say protein code for virus, I want to say no protein code for bacteria, right? Really solidify the point. Okay, now what else can we say? Well, one thing that bacteria has are organelles, right? Bacteria has organelles, whether it's a plasmid, whether it's their ribosomes, they have several organelles, unique organelles. However, a virus does not. Very simple. You just want to keep it simple because simplicity leads to complexity. So make sure you keep it simple to start with. Now, we've said organelle, so I think it's better if you don't mention an organelle, since we already said organelle generally. But if you didn't say organelles here, you could just say the organelle separately. You can say that the bacteria has a cell membrane while a virus does not. You can say the bacteria is going to have flagella, whereas viruses do not. So I kind of did something that I wouldn't recommend, which is by saying a general term like organelles here, but that's just because I know a third answer as well. But if you're unsure, just list the organelles separately so you can get separate marks as well. Now for the third mark, I would say something pretty simple, like viruses are much smaller. Right? Viruses are much smaller than bacteria. And yeah, that's a pretty good response, pretty easy one. We have many options to answer that one. So yeah, that's that page over. Okay, now let's go on question 2. So the diagram shows part of a food web from an ecosystem. And let's look at this food web afterwards. And it says, using the information in the food web, draw a food chain that contains 5 trophic levels and includes the birds. So before we look at the food web, let's just circle the birds so that we know that's going to have to be included. And it looks like they are an apex predator, the highest trophic level in the food chain that we're going to have to draw. So yeah, let's get right into it. So let's look at different pathways we can reach it. So we're going to have to go from a producer. So we're looking at this left section here. So we have, we can go from plants. Plants seems like a pretty simple trajectory. We're going from plants to worms that eat roots, to small arthropods, to large arthropods, to birds. Now let's count. Let's check if it's 5 trophic levels, because it said here it contains 5 trophic levels. We need to make sure it has that. So we have the plants, the worms that eat foods, small arthropods, large arthropods, birds. And yeah, that's 5 trophic levels. We just made a food chain. Now we could look for other ones by starting with dead plants. For example, going from dead plants to fungi, to small arthropods, to large arthropods, to birds. That's also 5. Also from dead plants to bacteria, to small arthropods, to large arthropods, and then to birds again. So many ways we can do it. I'm just going to do the one that we said at the start, which is plants. And this is how you draw it. You just want to draw an arrow that goes that way. Plants, worms. Write it exactly how it is. Worms that eat roots. Like, write it how it is. I'm not going to write it just in the sake of time, but yeah, write it exactly how it appears in the questions. Small arthropods, large arthropods. And then we can clearly see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see the trophic levels. Pretty easy. Just write them with the arrows going in the from one trophic level to another, transferring the energy to each other. Pretty simple question. Yeah. Okay, I describe how bacteria and fungi obtain energy from the organic matter. Sure. So this is a pretty simple, just pure theory question. They kind of applied it to the question because there was bacteria and fungi included, but just pure understanding. So there are a couple keywords that we have to use when we're talking about bacteria and fungi, right? Now, there's some ones that are unique to fungi, but the ones that are kind of useful when you're talking about bacteria and fungi is essentially for bacteria, it's going to be decomposing, breaking down organic matter, right? And the way it does this is through enzymes. Now, the distinction is this is internal when it comes to bacteria, but when you have a fungi, this is external. I'm numbering it not for any particular reason, just for clarity. So for fungi, it's external digestion. Remember that fungi are sapotrophs, right? Meaning they they secrete their enzymes. They secrete their enzymes onto this organic matter and it breaks it down. So sapotroph is a good word to remember. It'll always get you marks when you're talking about fungi. Yeah. So remember that fungi are sapotrophs, okay? Sapotrophs. And they secrete their enzymes onto organic matter. Okay? Organic matter. And then for both of them, we want to link it all together, right? Because how do they obtain energy, right? We've said that decomposed organic matter, they secrete their enzymes onto organic matter, but how do they actually get the energy? Well, they both respire. Remember, they're living organisms, they respire, and they produce ATP, adenosine triphosphate. There we go. B. A pesticide gets into this ecosystem. The pesticide kills small and large arthropods. Explain how this will affect the population of birds and the population of worms that eat roots. Okay, so there's a pesticide and it's killing the small and large arthropods. So let's have a look at our food web. I'll just erase our lines from before. So we know that this pesticide is going to reduce the amount of small and large arthropods. So if we reduce the amount here, right, that means that that's going to cause problems for our bird friend over here. Why? Because we know the bird is consuming the large arthropods as a source of their energy, and it doesn't seem they have any other source presented on this food web, which means the bird population is going to decrease due to a lack of food. How are they going to obtain nutrition? Well, they won't, and there's going to be a reduction in their population. But in converse, we can see the worms here. The worms are being consumed by the small arthropods. So if we have less small arthropods, what's that mean? Less worms are being consumed. And that means the worm population is going to rise because less of them are dying. So how do we write that in our answer? Well, we're just going to say fewer birds, less birds, however you want to say it. And our reasoning is going to be due to fewer large arthropods, so less food, right? Less available food for them. Now we're going to say it's going to be more worms, but this one is because fewer worms are consumed, right? Because their predator, right, has reduced. There are fewer predators of worms in that ecosystem, so there's a greater worm population. All right, so now we're on C. So it says scientists use 3 different traps to collect some soil animals. These traps are a basket trap, a pitfall trap, and a cul-de-sac trap. The number of animals collected by each trap are counted each day. The animals collected are classified into 3 types: springtails, mites, and large arthropods. And then we have a graph to show the scientists' results. Now we'll go back to the graph in a second, but let's first check what their question is. So it's asking us to discuss the number of each animal type collected by the 3 traps and refer to the scientists' results in the answer. Wow, very, very interesting question. This question is very intimidating because it's such a high marker that is quite broad, and you might be hard to decide like what aspect to talk about, because there's many different things in this graph. We have 3 different types of traps, 3 different types of animals, and we have this unit here of mean number of animals collected each day, so it's confusing, right? But the first thing I recommend you do if you have a confusing graph is look for things that are easy to spot. Look for things that you can group together, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's see if there's any common things we can find without being too specific. What is a general thing we can see in this graph? Well, one thing which I spotted immediately after looking at this is that if you have a look here, you can see that for each type of trap, you can see the white one is going to be the basket trap, this gray is the pitfall trap, and this black is the cul-de-sac trap. For each of the respective types of traps, the mites have the largest mean number of animals collected each day. You can see for this white bar, it's the highest out of all three. For the gray bar is the highest, and for the black bar it is also the highest. So that's an easy thing for us to mention. So one thing is there's more mites collected than any other animal for each trap. Okay, that's a very easy one to say, and because we've said something like more mites are collected, I don't think it's that necessary for us to use actual figures in this one. We do have to mention figures later on in our response, but for this one, since we already kind of explained that there are more mites collected than any other animal for each trap, it's basically inferred that we don't need to say what I mean, actually provide a figure. Okay, what else can we say? Well, we said which one has the most, but conversely, what else can we say? We can say which one has the least. And if you've seen, we can see if there's a pattern. And if you've seen already, you can see that these large arthropods have the lowest for each and every one of them. They have the smallest for the basket trap, the smallest for this pitfall trap, and the smallest for this cul-de-sac trap. So we can say the same thing, but just the inverse. So least large arthropods than any other animal for each trap. Just abbreviated arthropods to A there just for the sake of time, but make sure you write out the full word in all of your responses, okay? Okay, now that we've got some general stuff, we might need to look at something more specific, something else we can infer, because we need to discuss the number of each animal type collected by the three traps. So we're looking to discuss, which means we're just basically looking for certain patterns, looking for certain occurrences in the data. Now, another thing that we can see here is we can look specifically at one group of the animals. For example, we can look at the mites specifically. We can see that in terms of the three traps, the fewest mites were caught by the pitfall trap, right? The fewest mites caught by the pitfall trap. And because we're seeing something like that, we can easily get a figure for that. So if I look at this pitfall trap, I use a ruler, I mark it, we can see it's gonna be around 0.65, right? 0.65, that's what it looks like. And then we can say that there's the fewest mites collected by pitfall, okay? And then we can provide our figure just like this, 0.65. 0.65, and we can mention the unit as well, but yeah, for the sake of time I won't write the whole thing down because the unit is quite long, mean number of animals collected each day. So yeah, that's a pretty good thing to mention because it allows us to use a figure from the graph, and it's pretty easy to spot that for the mites, pitfall trap provides the least. And you can also say that for the rest of them, you can also say generally that it seems that the pitfall trap is catching the least of each of them, whether it's springtails, large arthropods, or mites. You can give a general thing like that. Just to provide variety in the type of answers you can pick, I'm going to use some different points, but I just want to show you that there's loads of things you can actually mention in this graph. Okay, so we've talked about mites. Let's just look at something we haven't looked at so far, which is the springtails. Now, if you look at the springtails, what can we see here? Well, we can see that the most springtails are being caught by The basket trap, this one right here, it's looking at 1.5 mean number of animals collected each day. So we can use the figure there pretty easily, and we can also mention that the most springtails are caught by basket trap. So most springtails, tails caught by basket trap. Then, it was 1.5. So use our figure here, 1.5. There we go. So now we have 4 of them. We literally have 4 points. We have 4 points just like that. So we can just get one more, and I'm going to try and think of something that's a bit different to what we've mentioned. So because we could go around the same path and then say something about the large arthropods, maybe talk about how the cul-de-sac trap is catching the most for the large arthropods, right? But I feel like that's pretty easy to spot. Pretty easy for you to understand. So instead, we can use something else. And another way we can analyze this is by looking at the heights and looking at the differences in the heights. So for mites, you can see there's a big difference between the pitfall trap and the other 2 bars, and the same is present for the springtails. But if you notice for the large arthropods, they're all relatively equal, right? Despite being different traps, the mean number of animals collected each day is pretty similar. So now that we've seen that, how do we say that in our analysis? Well, we can say something around the lines of the number, and well, if I'm being specific, it's mean number, but I'm just writing number for sake of time. So the number of large arthropods is basically almost equal in all traps. Okay, now if you want, you can give something that's roughly around. You can say it's roughly around here and then get the unit for that. And yeah, I just suggest, like, if you have the opportunity, provide some sort of figure for your answer, because it does ask you to refer to the scientist results in your answer. And the mark schemes all give you something like you're not going to be awarded marks if you don't make any reference to the actual data in terms of the actual figures. So make sure you don't forget to do that. It's very important. Yeah, many ways to answer this question. If you want some other answers, you could have said, I'll show you while looking at the graph, and I'll clear up the graph for you. So you could have said that there's a little difference in mite number between the basket trap and the cul-de-sac trap. We briefly touched on that earlier, but it's between these 2, little difference there. You can also talk about how there's a little difference between the springtails and those 2 traps as well. You could also mention fewer springtails caught by the pitfall trap. You can talk about how the cul-de-sac trap is catching the most animals in total. If you added them all up together, you would see that the cul-de-sac trap is actually catching the most animals in total. Another easy thing to say. And yeah, many options to answer this. Just don't be shy to write it down if you think of something, but make sure you support it with the data.